In the town of Eluwa, where the scent of ripe guavas hung in the air and every compound had a story, lived a woman named Ada. She was the eldest, the quiet backbone of the Emmanuel family. She never asked for recognition. She only acted, with love, with loyalty, with sacrifice. On a warm Tuesday morning, her father, Mr. Emmanuel, called a family meeting. He stood with pride and announced that the family business would be handed to Philip and Amaka, Ada's younger siblings. "You don't need anything, Ada. You've always been the strong one," he said. Not a word about the loans she paid. Not a single mention of the bills she cleared. Just that she was strong. As though strength was reason enough to be forgotten. Ada had done everything they asked. She paid off their mortgage without blinking. She stood by Philip when he got into trouble with the law and quietly funded Amaka's dream of becoming a social media star. But when she finally said no, they called her ungrateful. And a few days later, she came home to find her front door sealed with thick, hardened construction foam. Someone had blocked her from entering her own life. That was the moment Ada stopped being the helper. She became the buyer, the strategist, the one who took her silence and turned it into power. "If you've ever given more than you had and received nothing but blame," she would later say, "then you'll understand why I changed." Ada still remembered her father's voice. "We just thought it was fair you heard it from all of us." That phrase rang in her ears as she parked in front of the house she once called home. It was Amaka's voice she remembered next, always coated with sugar but sharp underneath. Fair in that family meant final. The compound smelled of old rain and recently cut grass. Her black heels pressed into the gravel with every step, each crunch like a warning. She hadn't been here in nearly a year. The house hadn't changed. But Ada had. The porch light flickered like a tired memory. The wind chime by the door still played its brittle tune. And the doormat, faded but stubborn, still said, "Family is forever." Ada pressed the bell once. No reply. Then the door opened. "Look who remembered she has a family," Amaka said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She wore a sparkling gown that screamed attention. Behind her, Philip stood slouched against the wall, eyes fixed on his phone. "Hello, Amaka," Ada replied softly, stepping into the familiar hallway. The air smelled like baked pasta and false peace. Her stepmother was carefully setting the table, as if fork placement could fix broken hearts. Mr. Emmanuel folded napkins, still without lifting his eyes. Dinner looked grand, but everything underneath was cracked. Ada's napkin was pale green. Everyone else had white. A signal, subtle but intentional. They chatted like nothing was wrong. Amaka boasted about a new sponsorship deal. Philip bragged about some investment that sounded like trouble in a suit. The stepmother asked about Ada's apartment like it was a rented flat in the village, not a luxury condo she paid for in full. Then, just as Mr. Emmanuel brought out the lemon pie, the truth was served. "We've finalized the will," the stepmother said, voice light. "Everything goes to Philip and Amaka. You understand, don't you?" Ada froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired. Philip leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You've got your own thing going on. You don't need all this," he said, gesturing lazily at the table. Amaka chuckled. "Please, you've made it clear you're too sophisticated for village properties," she added, sipping her drink. Ada turned slowly to her father. He stared blankly at the pie like it held all the answers. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than any betrayal. She had carried this family without ever keeping score. But suddenly it was clear. They had never seen her as part of them. Only as someone useful. Ada placed her fork down carefully. Her voice, calm but firm, broke through the room. "You didn't cut me out because I didn't need it. You cut me out because I stopped being convenient." Her stepmother's face didn't move. "That's not true. We just think you're strong." Ada gave a bitter smile. "Strong is just another word for disposable in this house." Amaka rolled her eyes. "Please don't make this dramatic," she muttered. Philip scoffed. "You act like we owe you something just because you helped." Ada leaned forward slightly. "No," she said softly. "But a thank you wouldn't have been too much to ask." The room fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hush. Ada stood slowly, the sound of her chair scraping the tile like thunder. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few buttons. Mortgage support cancelled. Utilities cancelled. Health insurance cancelled. She looked around the room. "You'll feel it in 30 days. Mr. Emmanuel's mouth parted slightly. The stepmother's hand froze mid-reach. "This is exactly why we didn't tell you sooner," she said in disbelief. Ada had already picked up her coat. "No," she replied as she walked to the door. "You didn't tell me because deep down, you knew how this ends." At the front door, Ada paused and looked back. Her father was still sitting there, still silent, eyes on his lap. "Still nothing?" she asked him gently. He blinked but said nothing. That was when she truly understood. She had never been their daughter. She had been their wallet with a kind smile. Her fingers brushed against the wooden door. Her eyes caught the family portrait hanging in the hallway. An old photo. Except now she noticed something new. She had been edited out. Cropped clean at the shoulder. They had erased her long before this dinner. She just hadn't wanted to believe it. The night air outside hit her like truth. Cold, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to her car, slammed the door shut, and drove home without looking back. That night she sat by her window, sipping tea she didn't remember making. The silence in her apartment was no longer loneliness. It felt earned. She opened her banking app and double-checked everything she had shut off. She wasn't trying to punish them. She was trying to protect what little was left of herself. They left her out of the will. But because she was finally done being theirs. They always said silence was golden, until Ada's silence started costing them money. The next morning her phone buzzed. Not once, not twice, but 5 times. 2 missed calls from her stepmother, 1 from a blocked number she knew was a mocha, and 2 from her uncle, Uncle Patrick, who only called when someone was dead, or demanding she apologize. Ada didn't answer. She brewed her coffee strong, took her cup to the balcony, and watched as the mist rolled over Eliawa's rooftops. The city moved on. So did she. Her peace no longer needed permission. By midday, she entered the office and caught Melanie, her graphic designer, by the espresso machine, phone in hand. The girl looked up nervously. "Are you all right?" she asked. Ada blinked. "Why wouldn't I be?" Melanie hesitated, biting her lip. "It's about Philip. He's been at the local pub saying things. Telling people you're unstable, that you're spiraling." Ada's coffee went cold in her hand. "He said that." Melanie nodded. "Said you've always been intense under pressure." Ada didn't respond. She walked back to her office, closed the door and sat down. Her hands didn't shake from fear, but from fury. Later that night, Amaka posted a video online. Sad piano music. Her staring out a window in fake tears. The caption read, "Sometimes love turns into control. Family shouldn't come with conditions. Real love doesn't need receipts." Ada didn't respond. She just took screenshots. Every post. Every comment. "Wow, your sister sounds toxic. Family should support, not manipulate. Sending you hugs, Queen." Ada archived them in a folder on her desktop. She named it, Receipts under 0001. She wasn't collecting them to fight. She was collecting them to remember. The next morning, Ada reached for her gym bag and opened her front door. She froze. Yellow foam, dry and cracked, stuffed into the doorframe, the lock even under the knob. Took her a full 10 seconds to register it. Construction foam. Just like before. She didn't panic. She opened her building security app, rewound the footage. There he was, Philip, hood up, 2 spray cans in hand, looking around nervously. He didn't even rush. It took the locksmith 2 hours to clean the mess and cut her back into her own apartment. She sat by the door afterward, not crying, just still. Her laptop glowed in the corner. She opened the police portal for the city. Type of report, vandalism. Suspect. Relative. Name, Philip Emmanuel. Evidence. Attached. She submitted the footage, the screenshots, and the name. 2 hours later her phone rang. Stepmother. Ada, are you serious? The woman barked. The police. On your own brother. Are you okay? Are you unraveling? Ada hung up. Then Uncle Patrick messaged. There has to be another way. We don't need lawyers. She didn't answer. That night she opened her journal and wrote one line. They taught me boundaries were betrayal. I'm learning now they're survival. The next morning a detective called. Philip had been notified. He was uncooperative. But the officer advised that he either pay for damages or risk formal charges. By noon, Uncle Patrick called again. What will it take to make this go away? He asked, voice low. Ada didn't blink. Nigerian Naira 3,000, she said. That's what it cost to fix the door. And I want a written apology. 2 minutes later he texted back. This is extortion. She replied. No. This is consequence. By evening she received a payment notification. 3,000 Nigerian Nairas received. Memo. Final settlement. No apology came. So Ada wrote one herself. She typed a fake letter, signed it with Philip's name, printed it in large bold font, and laminated it. She titled it, Confessions of a Vandal by Philip Emmanuel. Then she stuck it on her fridge, right beside a sticky note that read, Kindness doesn't come with an invoice, but it does have a limit. For the first time in a long while, her apartment was silent, and it didn't feel like punishment. Felt like peace. The foam residue was still there in the corners. But so was her clarity. The morning after the money arrived, Ada stood in her kitchen holding her phone. She reread the memo again. Final settlement. It wasn't victory, it was confirmation. Philip thought this was over. But Ada had just begun. Her mind traveled back to a rainy night 3 years ago, when Philip had called her from the roadside. Drunk. Crying. His car hit a pole. She had driven through heavy rain at 2 a.m., paid for the tow truck, the fine, and the court appearance. He had cried in her car. You saved me, he whispered. He was right. And he never said thank you. The smell of spray foam still lingered in her home. No cleaner could erase what it meant, that her own brother vandalized her door like a child throwing a tantrum. She printed the police report. 2 copies. One for herself, one to keep laminated. Then she made a phone call. Dante, she said. Is the offer still open? It's open, he replied. And the paperwork's ready. That afternoon, Ada walked into Dante's office with steady steps. She was no longer the woman who cried in the stairwell. His assistant offered her tea. She declined. Let's buy the company, she said. Technically, Dante replied. You'll be buying them out. They sat in front of a large wooden desk, the kind that made quiet deals feel permanent. Dante clicked to the next slide of a presentation. The company's in trouble. Payroll is unstable. Legal's buried in vendor complaints. The board wants out quietly. Ada nodded slowly. And the buyer? Dante grinned. They don't care who. Just whoever offers the cleanest close. He paused. And we've already built your shell company. Synonymous. It's funded. They'll never see it coming. Ada folded her arms. Good. Let's start the buyout. Her voice was calm. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. As they finalized the documents, Ada's phone buzzed. Voicemail. Uncle Patrick again. She ignored it. After signing, she left the office and walked 3 blocks to a quiet print shop. She uploaded the door footage and police report and asked for 3 bound copies. While she waited, she played the voicemail. You've made your point, he said. What will it take to fix this? In the background, she could hear her stepmother pacing. But Ada didn't reply. She was past explanations, past bargaining. She was now in the part of her story where action replaced apology. That evening, Ada returned home and found a yellow envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photo, Of the family house taken at dusk. On the back, in familiar handwriting, were the words, "For the record, I remember more than you think." She knew it was from her father. There was no apology, no name, just that one line. She placed the photo in a drawer. Not out of love. Out of record. She needed to remember who they all were. Not for pain but for clarity. She wouldn't pretend it didn't happen. She just wouldn't let it define her anymore. A few nights later, Ada invited 4 colleagues to her apartment for dinner. No relatives. Just people who respected her for who she was, not what she could give. There was laughter. Gentle teasing. Real warmth. They washed plates together. No one expected her to do everything. When they left, she cleaned up slowly. Candles still flickered in the corner. The quiet didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. They left her nothing in the will. No property. No heirloom. But in doing so, they gave her something they never meant to, her freedom. Freedom from their cycles. From guilt masked as tradition. From the belief that being family meant sacrificing your soul. She didn't need to forgive them to move on. She just needed to stop bleeding for people who called her healing selfish. That weekend, Ada booked a flight. Not to prove anything but to breathe. She didn't post it. She didn't announce it. She didn't owe anyone that anymore. She walked along cobbled streets in a quiet European city, journal in hand, eyes wide with wonder. No one there knew her story. And for once, she didn't need them to. Inside a small cathedral, she lit a candle. Not for anyone else but for herself. Not for healing but for honoring. At a cafe nearby, she scribbled a single line into her journal. "I spent years funding their lives. Now I'm finally buying back my own time." There were moments she missed the noise. The request. The feeling of being needed. But mostly she didn't. The silence now had weight, but also softness. And when she returned home weeks later, she was not the same woman who had left. She was lighter, sharper, and ready for the next move. 2 months after her return from the trip, the company was stable again. Staff morale had improved. The board, impressed by the quiet turnaround, re-elected Ada as chair, without opposition. For the first time, the company Christmas card was addressed directly to her, signed only by the new board. There was no mention of Philip or Amaka. Ada pinned the card to her office wall, not for pride but for proof. Proof that boundaries are survival. That walking away is not betrayal. That refusing to be erased is a kind of love, even if it doesn't look like it. She remembered the old her, the one who used to smile through tears at the family dinner table, too afraid to speak. That woman no longer lived here. Now Ada sat in a space she built herself. A space where no one could twist her silence into guilt. Where her presence wasn't conditional on giving. Where her value wasn't tied to sacrifice. She had fought hard to reclaim her dignity. And no one, not Mr. Emmanuel, not the stepmother, not even the people calling her dramatic, could take that from her again. Then came the leadership meeting. Ada wore black. Not for mourning but for clarity. The color helped her cut through nonsense without raising her voice. As she entered the office, Karen, the head of HR, smiled nervously. "You're early," she said, trying to sound casual. "I'm the CEO," Ada replied. "I'm never early. Everyone else is just late." Karen blinked, nodded quickly and walked off. Ada moved to the glass window that overlooked the heart of Elyua City. Rain traced quiet lines down the glass. She remembered another rainy day, 3 years ago, when she stood in the hallway outside a meeting marked, "Family Only." That day, she had flown in from Kano just to attend the quarterly strategy session. But as she approached the boardroom, Amaka stood in front of the door and smiled. "It's just family today," she said, and shut the door in Ada's face. Inside, Ada heard muffled applause. Philip laughing. Their stepmother's voice high and sweet. No one opened the door. She stood outside for 17 minutes, then walked away without a word. That moment stayed in her bones. It was the day she realized she could give everything and still be seen as nothing. Now the boardroom was hers. By 10 a.m., department heads filled the long table. legal, finance, operations, HR, all seated and alert. And in the corner, trying to blend in, sat Philip and Amaka. They hadn't received a formal removal yet. Amaka had traded her influencer look for a plain beige blazer. Philip sat scrolling his phone, pretending to be unbothered. Ada entered quietly and took her seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," she said. A staffer dimmed the lights. The projector came on. Slide 1. Quarterly expense breakdown. No one flinched yet. Slide 2 appeared. Unapproved disbursements. Philip Emanuel. Ada's voice remained steady. This report covers the last 3 fiscal quarters. During this period, Mr. Emanuel authorized multiple 6-figure transactions without oversight. She clicked again. Some were routed as fake consulting fees. Others were pushed through shell vendors. We traced the company accounts. They lead back to Philip's university roommate and a cousin in Benin. The room went silent. Philip chuckled. "This feels like a setup." Ada turned toward him. "No. This feels like fraud." Slide 3. PR budget misuse. Amaka Emanuel. Ada raised an eyebrow. Nigerian Naira 18,000 spent on bot traffic. 12,500 Nigerian Nairas to influencers with inactive accounts. And the digital campaign that was due last quarter. Still in draft. No approval. No delivery. Amaka sat upright. "I was following standard digital protocol," she said defensively. Ada nodded. "Protocol without results is just noise." The energy in the room shifted. Even those who once stayed quiet began to lean forward. Ada's voice never rose. "This was meant to be a leadership check-in," she said. "And we're checking why leadership failed." She stood and walked slowly toward the center of the room. This company survived market crashes, internal restructuring, and an economic recession. But it almost didn't survive nepotism. Her eyes scanned the room. Have you ever been pushed aside while others failed upward, just because they shared a last name? A few staff members nodded silently. "If you've known that kind of injustice," Ada said, "then you understand what's happening here." Philip and Amaka looked small in their chairs. Not cornered, just exposed. She continued. "Effective immediately, both Philip and Amaka Emanuel are relieved of their duties. Their access credentials have been revoked. Security will escort them out after this meeting." Amaka gasped. "You can't do this," she shouted. Philip stood, fists clenched. "This is a witch hunt." Dante, now seated beside HR, calmly slid 2 printed letters across the table. "Legally she can. And she already has." Ada turned to Philip and said, "Then call me Salem." No one laughed, but several nodded. It wasn't funny, it was necessary. From the far end of the room, Lisa, a quiet brand manager who had worked at the company for over a decade, raised her hand slowly. "I just want to say thank you," she said, voice soft but clear. "I was pushed out of the creative team last year because I wasn't trendy enough. I stayed quiet. But we've all been waiting for someone to actually lead." Heads turned. Staff nodded. Some whispered in agreement. Ada didn't reply. She simply gave Lisa a small nod of gratitude. Then she turned, heels sharp against the floor, and walked out of the room. On her way back to her office, Ada passed the small supply closet they used to call her workspace. It still had the broken chair and faded dry erase board. She opened the drawer out of instinct and found an old sticky note inside. The handwriting read, "Just leave it. Amaka will review it." She stared at it for a moment, then smiled without joy. That note was proof. Proof that she had never truly been included, just tolerated until they no longer needed her. She didn't take the note. She left it there right where they left her. By the time Ada sat at her desk, her phone buzzed. A message from her stepmother. "We need to talk." She didn't reply. 5 minutes later, another message came from Mr. Emanuel. "We weren't part of this. Can we meet?" She read it slowly, then locked her phone and turned it face down. It had been 12 days since the boardroom fallout. And for once, the silence that followed didn't feel like exile. It felt like oxygen. No more demands. No more guilt. Just stillness. The kind that comes when the storm has passed and the ground finally begins to dry. That morning, Ada went to her favorite cafe near Elua Market. She carried her brown leather notebook, ordered a cappuccino, and sat by the window. She didn't write company strategy. She didn't scroll her phone. She just watched. A boy played with a plastic bag outside. A woman sold pawpaws from a wooden stall. Tourists pointed at things Ada no longer noticed. The ordinary world went on, unaware of the battles she'd fought. And in that moment, Ada felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom from expectation. Then her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Aunt Lorraine, her mother's only sister. The one who once whispered at a wedding, "You're not wrong, Ada, just outnumbered." The text read, "I saw your post. I didn't know it was that bad. If you ever want to talk, I'm around." Ada read it twice. Then typed, "Coffee next week?" The reply came instantly. "Name the place." That night, Ada went home and opened the folder on her desktop. Receipts under 0001. Screenshots, PDFs. Video footage. Every time they lied. Every time they pretended. She didn't need them anymore, but she didn't delete them. Closure didn't mean forgetting. Instead, she created a new folder. She named it Future. Inside, she saved one file, Vision under 2026.docs. The file was empty for now, but the space it held felt sacred. The next morning, she met Aunt Lorraine at a quiet diner in town. Her aunt was early. Ada liked that. "You look different," Lorraine said, setting down her tea. "I feel different," Ada replied. There was a pause. Then her aunt said gently, "I never realized how much you were doing for them." Ada nodded. Neither did they. And with that, the walls between them started to soften. They talked for an hour. About nothing. About everything. About childhood games and coconut rice. About the silence after her mother passed. About how her father had slowly stopped looking her in the eye. It was the kind of conversation Ada hadn't had in years. No angle, no guilt, no expectations. Just two women sharing truth without needing permission. And for the first time in a long time, Ada felt seen. Not used. Not pitted. But seen. And that was a kind of healing no therapy session had ever given her. A few days later, a plain brown package arrived at Ada's door. No return name. No note. Inside was a single photo. An image of the family house, taken at sunset. The porch light still flickered. The windows were half drawn. On the back, in clean, familiar handwriting, "For the record, I remember more than you think." Ada didn't have to guess. It was from Mr. Emmanuel. No apology. No explanation. Just an echo of guilt wrapped in nostalgia. She placed the photo in a drawer. Not to hold on, but to remember who they truly were. That weekend, Ada hosted a dinner at her apartment. Only 4 guests. Colleagues, not blood. People who respected her without needing anything from her. There was no drama. No fake toast. Just rice, music, laughter, and conversations about dreams. After they left, she washed the plates by hand, candles still glowing softly. And somewhere between the sponge and the towel, she realized something. They had given her nothing in the will. No house, no land, no business shares. But in doing so, they had unknowingly given her everything. Her freedom. Freedom not just from inheritance or duty, but from the belief that love must always hurt. That loyalty means silence. That being the eldest means being the sacrifice. That being strong means never resting. That helping others means disappearing. She didn't need to forgive them to heal. She didn't need to explain herself to feel valid. She didn't need to carry anyone who kept cutting her down. That night, she wrote one final note in her journal. Forgiveness is not a return ticket. It is the decision to stop walking in circles. That Monday, Ada arrived at the office early. She unlocked her door, powered up her system, and stared out at the morning light. Her life wasn't perfect. Her family hadn't changed. But she had. She wasn't bitter, she was awake. She wasn't lost. She had simply changed direction. And in a world that often silenced women like her, she had chosen to speak. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with truth, boundary, and business. And that, she knew, was more than enough. Weeks passed, and the whispers died down. The same relatives who once bombarded her with calls now gave her space, not out of respect, but because they feared what she might say next. Silence, once her prison, had become her armor. At the company, changes took root. New hires. Promotions based on merit. Staff who once walked on eggshells around Philip and Amaka now spoke freely. One afternoon, Ada passed the break room and overheard a junior staff saying, "It finally feels like someone sane is in charge." She didn't interrupt. She smiled to herself and kept walking. On the last Friday of the month, Ada received an envelope at her desk. No stamp. No handwriting. Inside was an old birthday card she'd once made for Mr. Emmanuel as a child. It had been torn down the middle and taped together again. No note came with it. Just the gesture. Ada sat with it for a while. Then quietly, she folded it in half and slipped it into her drawer. Not out of bitterness, but because she was finally learning to hold both grief and growth in the same hand. The kind of peace she now had didn't erase the past. It simply refused to be defined by it. She spent that weekend away. No phones, no laptops, just nature and breath, and the knowledge that she didn't owe anyone her exhaustion. She wrote poems for the first time in years. She napped under the sun without guilt. And when she walked barefoot by the riverside, she whispered out loud, "I am no longer their scapegoat." The wind didn't reply, but the quiet understood. And for the first time in her adult life, Ada didn't measure her worth by who needed her. She measured it by how freely she could finally live. Back in Eluwa, people still talked. Some said she had changed. Others said she had grown cold. But the people who mattered, the ones who worked beside her, built with her, believed in her, they knew. Ada had not changed. She had returned to herself. She had reclaimed every version of her that once got buried beneath duty and debt. She was no longer trying to fix a family that only knew how to take. She was building something stronger than legacy. She was building truth. And truth, unlike inheritance, couldn't be taken away. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Ada sat alone on her balcony, a cup of ginger tea warming her hands. She didn't think about who she used to be. She didn't worry about who might still misunderstand her. She just breathed. Below her, the lights of Eluwa flickered on one by one, like a quiet applause from the universe. She opened her notebook and wrote one final line.